Kai pressed his palm against the biometric scanner, still trying to shake off his confusion. The elite officers' quarters were off limits to maintenance staff, like him, yet here he was, summoned by direct order to inspect Captain Velara's personal armor. The heavy blast doors hissed open, revealing a corridor lined with polished steel that reflected his uncertain expression back at him. Technician Kai reporting for equipment inspection. He announced to the empty hallway, his voice swallowed by the sound dampeners. The ship's AI had been frustratingly vague about the details, only mentioning a critical malfunction in living armor systems. Living armor was Zenthari technology alien, complex, and typically serviced by their own specialists. Why they needed a human technician was beyond him. The door to Captain Velara's quarters slid open before he could announce himself, and Kai stepped inside, immediately struck by the chamber's austere beauty. Everything was precisely arranged, from the ceremonial weapons mounted on the walls to the meditation alcove in the corner. But it was the figure standing in the center of the room that made his breath catch. Captain Velara stood with her back to him, encased in her living armor. The biosuit clung to her tall, athletic frame like a second skin, its surface a deep midnight blue that seemed to shift and breathe in the ambient light. Neural pathways glowed softly beneath the translucent outer layer, creating patterns that moved like slow lightning across her shoulders and down her arms. Kai had seen images of Zenthari armor before, but witnessing it in person was mesmerizing. "You're the technician," she said without turning around, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had made her legendary throughout the fleet. "I was expecting one of your specialists." "I am a specialist, Captain," Kai replied, sitting down, his equipment case with practiced quiet. "Biomechanical systems are my primary field. Your armor is registering some unusual readings?" When she finally turned to face him, Kai had to consciously keep his expression professional. Captain Velara was striking even by Zenthari standards, tall and graceful, with the silver-streaked dark hair of her species and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. The armor enhanced her natural presence, making her appear almost otherworldly. But there was something else in those sharp features, a tension he couldn't quite identify. "The suit has been responding unpredictably," she said, moving toward him with fluid steps. "The neural interfaces are hypersensitive. Touch responses are heightened beyond normal parameters." Kai activated his diagnostic scanner, trying to focus on the readings rather than the way the armor seemed to pulse gently with each of her movements. "When did you first notice the irregularities?" 3 days ago, during combat training." Her eyes never left his face as he circled her, taking initial readings. "The armor's emotional regulators began fluctuating. It's affecting my performance. May I?" Kai gestured toward her shoulder, where his scanner had detected the strongest anomalies. At her nod, he reached out carefully, placing his palm against the warm surface of the armor. The reaction was immediate and startling. The neural pathways beneath his hand flared bright blue, and he felt a subtle vibration run through the biosuit. Velara's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but he caught it. "Interesting," he murmured, genuinely fascinated despite the intimacy of the contact. "The armor is designed to respond to the wearer's emotional state, correct? But this feels like it's responding to external stimuli as well." He moved his hand along the shoulder joint, watching as the light patterns followed his touch. The armor was warm, almost alive beneath his fingers, and he found himself wondering what Velara was feeling as he worked. Her breathing had become slightly more pronounced, though she maintained her rigid posture. "The shoulder actuator seems to be the primary issue," Kai said, moving behind her to examine the joint mechanism. This close, he could smell something like ozone and exotic flowers, whether from her or the armor, he couldn't tell. "I need to access the internal components. Is there a way to isolate this section?" "The armor can be partially retracted," Valara replied, her voice carefully controlled. "But the process requires trust between the suit and anyone making contact with it." Kai paused, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "Trust? The armor reads biometric data, emotional states, stress indicators. If it perceives a threat, it will lock down completely." She was quiet for a moment. "It has never allowed a non-Xanthari to access its systems." "But you think it might allow me?" Something shifted in her expression, a crack in that perfect military composure. "I think it's already responding to you in ways I don't understand." As if to prove her point, the armor pulsed brighter under his touch, the neural pathways creating an intricate web of light that ran from his fingers across her back and down her arms. Kai felt his own pulse quicken, though he told himself it was just professional interest in the fascinating technology. "We should proceed carefully," he said, though he made no move to step away from her. "I'll need to establish a deeper interface with the armor systems." Valara turned within the circle of his arms, now facing him directly. They were close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from the living armor. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her gaze made his chest tighten. "Captain?" he asked softly, suddenly very aware that they were alone in her private quarters, that his hands were still touching her armor, that she was studying his face with an intensity that had nothing to do with military protocol. Then, without warning, she reached out and placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. The contact sent a shock through him, not painful, but electric, intimate, in a way that made his breath catch. "What?" he started to ask, but she cut him off. "I was told that humans feel trust through contact," she said, her voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "I am testing that theory." But even as she spoke, neither of them moved to break the contact. Her hand remained pressed to his chest, and he could feel his heartbeat accelerating under her touch. The armor around them pulsed in rhythm, as if responding to both their elevated pulse rates. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibilities that neither protocol nor wisdom could fully dismiss. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Kai's heart hammered against his ribs, where Valara's palm pressed against his chest, and he could see in her eyes that she felt every rapid beat. The living armor around them pulsed in sympathetic rhythm, casting shifting patterns of blue light across the walls of her quarters. "Is this part of the diagnostic?" Kai asked quietly, though he made no move to step away from her touch. Valara's expression flickered a brief crack in her composed facade. "No," she admitted, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "This is something else entirely." She finally withdrew her hand, but the absence of contact felt like a loss. The armor's glow dimmed slightly, as if it too missed the connection. Kai watched as she moved to the large viewport, her silhouette outlined against the stars beyond. "The armor has been responding to emotions I was trained never to feel," she said, her back to him. "Xanthari warriors are taught to suppress such distractions. But lately, the biosuit reads sensations I don't understand." Kai picked up his scanner, though his focus remained entirely on her. "What kind of sensations?" "Curiosity. About your species. About you specifically." She turned back to face him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that made his chest tighten. "The armor has been cataloging your biometric signature since you first entered the ship's systems. It responds to your proximity even when your deck's away. That single quotes S. Not normal? Nothing about this is normal." Valara moved closer, and Kai noticed how the armor seemed to flow with her movements, liquid and alive. "May I show you something?" At his nod, she placed her hand on a hidden panel near her throat. The armor responded immediately, sections beginning to retract with a soft whisper of biomechanical systems. Kai watched, fascinated, as the shoulder piece he'd been examining folded back into itself, revealing smooth, pale skin beneath. The sight of her bare shoulder and upper arm was unexpectedly intimate. Xanthari's skin had a subtle luminescence, and he could see the faint marks where the armor's neural interfaces had been connected. Without thinking, he reached out to trace one of the connection points with his fingertip. Valara's sharp intake of breath made him freeze. "I'm sorry, Don't stop," she said quietly. "Please." Her permission sent heat coursing through him. He continued his gentle exploration, mapping the delicate interface points that allowed her nervous system to merge with the living armor. Her skin was warm and impossibly soft, and he could feel her pulse racing under his touch. "The armor learns," she whispered, her eyes closing as his fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "It adapts. And recently, it's been learning things about desire that my culture never taught it to process. Is that why it's malfunctioning?" "I don't think it's malfunctioning at all. I think it's evolving." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. "Because of you." The admission hung between them like a challenge. Kai felt his own control slipping as he took in the sight of her, his formidable warrior allowing herself to be vulnerable. The living armor responding to their shared attraction with gentle pulses of light. "Valara?" He said her name for the first time, and the sound of it seemed to affect her as much as his touch. She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from both her skin and the armor. "In my culture, we believe that showing emotion makes us weak. But when you touch me, when the armor responds to you, I feel stronger than I ever have." Her hand found his chest again, but this time her touch was deliberate, exploratory. She spread her fingers wide, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heart. "Your pulse quickens when you look at me." "Yes," he admitted, his voice rough with want. "Mine does the same." She guided his hand to rest over her heart, where the armor had retracted. Her skin was fever warm, and he could feel her heartbeat matching his own elevated rhythm. "The armor reads this as combat preparation, but I know better." The space between them seemed to shrink of its own accord. Kai found himself studying. The curve of her lips, the way the starlight from the viewport caught the silver threads in her dark hair. The armor around them pulsed brighter, as if feeding off their mutual attraction. "I've never felt anything like this," Valara whispered, her breath warm against his face. "It terrifies me." "Me too," he admitted, his hand moving to cup her cheek. Her skin was silk beneath his palm, and she leaned into the contact with a soft sigh. They were a breath apart now, the moment balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Kai could see his own want reflected in her dark eyes, could feel the tremor in her breathing that matched his own. Just as their lips were about to meet, the ship's alert system blared to life. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber, and the commander's voice echoed through the comm system. "All senior officers to stations. We have incoming hostiles." The spell between them shattered. Valara's expression shifted instantly back to military focus, though Kai caught the flash of regret in her eyes. The armor began reassembling itself around her with practiced efficiency, covering the skin he'd been touching moments before. "Duty calls," she said, though her voice carried a note of loss that made his chest ache. "Captain," he called as she moved toward the door. She paused, looking back at him. "This isn't over." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. First genuine smile he'd seen from her. "No, Kai, I don't believe it is." As she strode from the room, armor gleaming and warrior's mask firmly in place, Kai remained behind, his heart still racing from their interrupted moment. The diagnostic scanner in his hand showed readings that made no scientific sense. The armor's biosignatures had been perfectly synchronized with both their elevated pulse rates. Whatever was happening between them, the living armor was learning to love. 3 days had passed since the interrupted moment in Velara's quarters, and Kai found himself returning each evening under the pretense of monitoring the armor's ongoing calibration issues. They both knew it was an excuse the diagnostic. Readings had been stable since their first encounter, but neither addressed the fiction that allowed them these stolen hours together. Tonight, Velara was waiting for him when he arrived, already having dismissed her guards for the evening. She stood by the viewport, no longer wearing the full battle configuration of her armor, but rather the lighter, more form-fitting base layer that allowed for easier maintenance access. "The readings have been fluctuating again," she said without turning around, though they both knew it was a lie. Kai set down his equipment and moved to stand behind her. The stars beyond the viewport cast silver light across her profile, highlighting the elegant lines of her face. "Show me," he said softly. Instead of moving to the diagnostic station, Velara turned to face him. "I've been thinking about what happened the other night, about what we almost ... So have I." He stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her expression. "Have you regretted it?" "That's what I should feel," she admitted. "Regret, shame. But instead, I find myself anticipating these moments we have together." The armor responds to that anticipation. It practically hums with it. As if to prove her point, the neural pathways in her armor began to glow softly, creating intricate patterns that flowed across her body like liquid light. Kai reached out, tracing one of the glowing lines with his fingertip, and watched as the pattern brightened under his touch. "In Xanthari culture," Velara continued, her voice growing husky as his finger followed the light down her arm, "emotional attachment is seen as a weakness. Warriors who allow themselves to feel ... connection are considered compromised. And what do you believe?" Kai asked, his touch becoming bolder, more deliberate. "I believe," she said, catching his hand and pressing it flat against her chest where the armor was thinnest, "that they're wrong." The admission seemed to unlock something in both of them. Velara's hands found the fastenings of his uniform jacket, her fingers working with surprising urgency. Kai helped her, then returned the favor by finding the hidden controls that would allow the armor to retract further. "Are you certain?" he asked, even as his hands moved to the biosuit's interface points. "I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered against his ear, sending shivers down his spine. The armor responded to her emotional state, sections peeling back to reveal more of her luminescent skin. Kai took his time exploring each newly exposed area, his touch reverent as he mapped the geography of scars that told stories of battles fought and won. Each mark was beautiful to him, evidence of her strength and survival. When his fingers traced a particularly deep scar along her ribs, Velara caught his hand. "That one nearly killed me," she said quietly. 3 years ago, during the Proxima campaign." "It's beautiful," he said, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to the mark. "They all are. They're part of what makes you who you are." Her sharp intake of breath turned into a soft moan as he continued his exploration, his lips following the path his fingers had traced. The armor around them pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, creating an intimate cocoon of light and warmth. "Kai." She breathed his name like a prayer, her hands tangling in his hair as he worshipped her scars, her skin, every part of her that she'd allowed him to see. When he finally looked up, her eyes were dark with desire, the controlled mask of the warrior, completely dissolved. She pulled him up to her, and this time, nothing interrupted their kiss. It was everything the moment 3 days ago had promised, desperate, hungry, tender, all at once. Velara kissed him like she was claiming him, like she was pouring all her suppressed emotions into the connection between their lips. Kai responded with equal intensity, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The armor continued to glow around them, its light growing brighter as their passion intensified. When Velara's hands found the hem of his shirt, pulling it over his head, the biosuit's response was almost musical, a harmonic pulse that seemed to celebrate their union. They moved together toward her sleeping alcove, pausing frequently for kisses, for touches, for whispered words that neither had ever expected to say. When Velara finally disabled the last of the armor's connections, letting it pool at her feet like liquid starlight, Kai's breath caught at the sight of her. She was magnificent, tall, and strong, her skin bearing the faint luminescence of her species, every line of her body speaking of power and grace. But it was the trust in her eyes that undid him completely. "You're incredible," he whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for her. "As are you," she replied, her fingers exploring the planes of his chest, the different texture of human skin fascinating to her. "I never understood what my armor was trying to tell me until now. It wasn't malfunctioning, it was trying to explain what I felt when I looked at you." Their love-making was a revelation, tender and fierce by turns, each touch a discovery. Velara's usual controlled nature dissolved under Kai's patient attention, her soft cries and gasps music to his ears. In return, she explored him with the focused intensity she brought to everything, learning what made him gasp, what made him tremble beneath her touch. The discarded armor pulsed gently beside them, its neural pathways flickering in harmony with their joined rhythm. It was as if the biosuit itself was experiencing their connection, learning the language of love through their intertwined emotions. Afterward, they lay entwined in the soft light of the armor's glow, both breathing hard, both changed by what they'd shared. Velara's head rested on Kai's chest, her silver-streaked hair spilling across his skin like liquid moonlight. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. Kai's arms tightened around her. "I don't know, but I know I don't want this to end." "Nor do I," she admitted, "though I fear what my people will say if they discover the truth." "Let them talk," Kai said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "What we have ... it's not weakness. It's strength." The armor pulsed in agreement, its light warm and steady around them like a benediction. But even as they held each other in the afterglow of their union, both knew that their greatest challenges lay ahead. Love might have found them, but keeping it would require a courage neither had been trained for. Still, as Velara's breathing deepened into sleep against his chest, Kai allowed himself to hope that what they'd found together was worth any price they might have to pay. The morning alarm found them still entwined, Velara's head on Kai's shoulder, and the living armor casting a gentle glow around their sleeping forms. Reality crashed back as the ship's systems hummed to life, reminding them both of the separate worlds they belonged to. Velara stirred first, her warrior's instincts pulling her from sleep. For a moment, her expression was soft, unguarded as she looked at Kai. Then the weight of her position settled back on her shoulders like invisible armor. "You should go," she said quietly, though her hand lingered on his chest. "Commander Dex makes his rounds early, and if he finds you here—" Kai caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I know, but Velara last night wasn't a mistake." "No," she agreed, her eyes meeting his. "It wasn't. But that doesn't make our situation any less impossible." Over the following days, they tried to return to a professional relationship, but the armor betrayed them. During routine bridge operations, the biosuit would pulse whenever Kai entered the command deck for routine maintenance. The neural pathways would flare when he passed by, creating patterns that any trained observer could read as emotional response. Commander Dex, Velara's second-in-command and most trusted officer, began to notice. His sharp eyes tracked the armor's reactions, his expression growing more concerned with each incident. "Captain," he said after Kai had left the bridge following a routine diagnostic, Your armor is displaying irregular emotional patterns. Perhaps you should undergo a full psychological evaluation. Velara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My armor is functioning within normal parameters, Commander. My performance remains optimal. Of course, Captain. But the biosuit's responses they suggest nothing, she cut him off, her voice carrying the unmistakable edge of command authority. Return to your duties. But Dex's suspicions were now aroused, and Velara knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth. That time came sooner than expected. The attack siren screamed through the ship at 400 hours. Kai was pulled from sleep in his quarters as the emergency lights bathed everything in red. Over the comm system, Velara's voice cut through the chaos. All hands to battle stations. We have multiple hostiles incoming. This is not a drill. Kai raced to his emergency station in the engineering section, but his thoughts were with Velara. Through the ship's internal monitors, he could see her on the bridge, her armor now in full battle configuration, the biosuit's weapon systems online and glowing with deadly purpose. The enemy ship's sleek, predatory vessels from the Korath Syndicate came at them in attack formation. The Nexus Dawn shuddered under the first barrage of plasma fire, and Kai felt his heart leap into his throat as he watched Velara coordinate the defense dot. She was magnificent in combat, every inch the legendary warrior her reputation claimed. The living armor moved with her like liquid steel, enhancing her reflexes, processing tactical data faster than any computer. But then Kai noticed something wrong. The armor's neural pathways were flickering erratically. The emotional interference that had been building between them was affecting the biosuit's combat protocols. As the battle intensified, the disruption grew worse. Evasive maneuvers. Velara commanded, but even as the ship rolled away from incoming fire, Kai could see the armor struggling to maintain its synchronization with her nervous system. Then disaster struck. A Korath torpedo breached their shields, and the ship bucked violently. Velara was thrown from her command station, and as she hit the deck, the armor systems failed completely. The biosuit went dark, its neural pathways shutting down just as enemy boarding pods breached the hull. Captain! Vex's voice carried over the comm as Korath warriors poured into the ship's corridors. Kai didn't hesitate. Grabbing his repair kit and a plasma rifle from the emergency locker, he sprinted toward the bridge. The corridors were chaos crew, members fighting hand-to-hand with boarders, emergency bulkheads sealing off damaged sections, the acrid smell of plasma burns filling the air. He found Velara in the auxiliary command center, surrounded by her bridge crew and a squad of Korath fighters. Her armor was completely offline, leaving her with only a standard sidearm against enemies in powered combat suits. Without thinking, Kai burst into the firefight, his rifle cutting down two Korath warriors before they could react. Velara! He shouted over the weapon's fire. The armor, I can fix it. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and terror. Kai, get out of here. It's too dangerous. Not without you, he said, diving behind cover as plasma bolts seared the air around. Him. Trust me. The next few minutes were the longest of Kai's life. While Velara and her remaining crew held off the attackers, he worked frantically on the armor's neural interfaces, his hands steady despite the battle raging around them. The biosuit's emotional processors had overloaded, creating a cascade. Failure in the entire system. The armor is trying to protect you from the emotional feedback, he called to her over the weapon's fire. But it's creating a loop. You have to embrace what you're feeling. Don't fight it. I don't understand, she replied, firing her sidearm at an advancing Korath. You're afraid. Kai shouted, his fingers flying over the armor's reset sequences. Not of them of losing what we have. The armor can't process that because you've never let yourself feel it before. Velara's eyes widened with understanding. As the last of her security team fell around them, and the Korath closed in. She did. Something she'd never done before she opened herself completely to the emotions she'd been trained to suppress. Fear, love, desperation, hope, all of it flooded through her at once. The armor blazed to life. The neural pathways erupted in brilliant light as the biosuit synchronized, not just with her tactical mind, but with her whole heart. Powered by the full spectrum of her emotions, Valera became something beyond what she'd ever been as a warrior. She moved like lightning, the armor enhancing every movement, every instinct. But now it was enhanced by more than just combat training. It was powered by her desperate need to protect the man she loved, to survive so they could have a future together. The remaining Korath didn't stand a chance. When the battle was over, when the enemy ships had been driven off, and the all-clears sounded throughout the ship, Velara and Kai found themselves alone in the devastated command center. Her armor still glowed with the aftermath of their synchronized emotions, but her eyes were filled with tears. "We saved the ship," she whispered, "but they'll know now. Everyone will know." Kai pulled her close, armor and all. "Let them know. What we have isn't shameful. It's what saved everyone." But even as he held her, they both knew that their real battle was just beginning. Commander Thex's voice over the comm confirmed their fears. "Captain, the High Command is requesting a full report. They want to know why your armor failed and how it was restored." Velara closed her eyes, leaning into Kai's embrace for what might be the last time. Soon, she would have to choose between her career and her heart. The armor pulsed gently around them, no longer fighting the emotions that had nearly destroyed them. But they both knew that acceptance from their respective cultures would be much harder to achieve. "Whatever happens," Kai whispered against her. "Hair, it was worth it." "Yes," she agreed, her voice breaking. "It was worth everything." The disciplinary hearing was set for 3 days after the battle. In the time between, Kai threw himself into analyzing every piece of data from Valara's armor, searching for scientific proof of what they'd experienced together. If he could demonstrate that emotional synchronization enhanced rather than hindered the armor's performance, perhaps there was hope. Velara, meanwhile, prepared for the end of her career. High Command had made it clear that her compromised emotional state was under investigation. The fact that her armor had failed during combat was all the evidence they needed of her unfitness for duty. "You could still transfer," she told Kai the night before the hearing, as they stood together in her quarters for what might be the last time. "Request reassignment to another ship. No one would blame you." "I'm not going anywhere," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "We face this together." The next morning, the holographic tribunal convened in the ship's main conference room. 3 Xanthari High Commanders appeared as shimmering projections, their expressions carved from stone. Commander Thex sat at the witness table, his duty clear despite the regret in his eyes. "Captain Velara," the center commander spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You stand accused of allowing personal emotions to compromise your effectiveness as a warrior. The evidence suggests you have formed an inappropriate attachment to a human crew member, causing catastrophic failure of your living armor during combat. How do you answer these charges?" Velara stood at attention, her armor gleaming in its formal configuration. "I accept full responsibility for my actions, commanders." "And the nature of your relationship with Technician Kai?" A long pause. Then, "I love him." The admission sent ripples through the assembled officers. Several Xanthari crew members looked away in shame, while others watched with fascination. It was perhaps the first time in their military history that a captain had openly admitted to such feelings. "Then you admit to compromising your duty?" The second commander demanded. "No, sir. I admit to discovering that my duty was incomplete." Before the commanders could respond, Kai stepped forward. "Permission to address the tribunal?" You have no standing here, human, the third commander said dismissively. I have scientific evidence that challenges your assumptions about emotional compromise, Kai replied firmly. Data that could revolutionize Zenthari military doctrine. The commanders exchanged glances. Finally, the center commander nodded. Speak. Kai activated his portable holographic display, showing the detailed analysis he'd compiled. The armor didn't fail because of emotional interference. It failed because it was evolving beyond its original programming. When Captain Velara allowed herself to experience the full spectrum of emotions during our relationship, the armor began learning to process and enhance those feelings. The display showed neural pathway maps, efficiency ratings, response times. During the battle, when the captain fully synchronized with her emotional state, the armor's performance increased by 37% above standard parameters. Her reaction times, tactical processing, and physical capabilities all exceeded normal specifications. Impossible, the second commander stated. Emotion is weakness. It clouds judgment. With respect, sir, that's an outdated paradigm. Kai continued. Love, fear, hope, these aren't weaknesses to be suppressed. They're additional data sources that can enhance decision-making when properly integrated. The captain's love for me didn't make her weak. It made her stronger because she had something worth fighting for. Velara stepped forward. Commanders, I request permission to demonstrate. Demonstrate what? The true capability of evolved armor integration. She looked directly at Kai, her eyes filled with trust and love. I request trial by combat. The tribunal chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Trial by combat was an ancient Zenthari tradition, rarely invoked in modern times, but it was still legally binding. You would stake your career on single combat? The center commander asked. I would stake my career on proving that love is strength, not weakness, Velara replied. And I choose Commander Thex as my opponent. Thex rose from his seat, his expression pained but determined. Captain, I cannot let personal feelings interfere with my duty to the service. Nor would I ask you to, she replied. Fight me with everything you have, old friend. Help me prove that evolution is possible. The combat arena was cleared within the hour. Standard Zenthari trial, by combat rules applied non-lethal weapons. Victory by surrender or incapacitation. Thex wore traditional battle armor, while Velara's living armor had been reset to baseline configuration. As the two warriors faced each other across the combat circle, Kai could see the doubt in Velara's eyes. Without their emotional connection, her armor was just another piece of equipment. Trust yourself, he called to her. Trust what we have. The combat began with explosive intensity. Thex was younger, faster, and his traditional armor was optimized for pure physical performance. He drove Velara back with a series of devastating attacks, his plasma blade carving through the air where she'd been moments before. For the first few minutes, it seemed as though the tribunal's position would be vindicated. Velara fought well, but she was clearly outmatched. Her armor remained inert, providing no enhancement beyond basic protection. Then Kai did something. That surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped to the edge of the combat circle and began to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet intensity. I love the way you move when you think no one is watching, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent arena. I love the scars that tell your story. I love how you trusted me enough to show me who you really are beneath the armor. Velara's movements began to change. The armor's neural pathways flickered to life. I love your strength, he continued, but I love your vulnerability more. I love that you chose to feel, even when it terrified you. Now the armor blazed with light, responding not to suppressed emotions, but to embraced ones. Velara moved with renewed grace, her combat style evolving. Before their eyes, She wasn't just fighting Nex, she was dancing with him, anticipating his moves not through tactical analysis alone, but through the enhanced intuition that came from fighting for love rather than mere duty. The tide of combat turned. Powered by the full spectrum of her emotions, love, determination, hope, even fear, Velara became something unprecedented. Her armor sang with harmonic resonance as it amplified not just her physical capabilities, but her emotional intelligence. When she finally disarmed Vex and held her blade to his throat, the arena was silent except for the gentle humming of her fully synchronized armor. "I yield," Vex said quietly, respect clear in his voice. "And I withdraw my objections to the captain's conduct." The tribunal deliberated for only minutes before rendering their verdict. The center commander's voice carried a note of wonder that hadn't been there before. "Captain Velara, this tribunal finds that your actions, while unprecedented, have opened new possibilities for our understanding of armor integration. You are hereby granted permission to continue your research into emotional enhancement protocols." Relief flooded through Kai, but the commander wasn't finished. "However, this represents a fundamental shift in our military doctrine. You will be transferred to a new position head of the Emotional Integration Research Division. Your mission will be to train others in these new techniques." Velara looked at Kai, then back at the commanders. "And my research partner?" "Technician Kai will be promoted to Chief of Biointegration Studies. Your partnership will be officially recognized." As the tribunal dissolved and the arena began to empty, Kai found himself pulled into Velara's arms, armor and all. She kissed him deeply, openly, in front of her entire crew. The living armor around them pulsed with joy, its light warm and welcoming. "So," she murmured against his lips, "it seems we're going to revolutionize the galaxy together." "I can't think of anything I'd rather do," he replied, holding her close as the armor hummed contentedly around them. 6 months later, their research station orbited a peaceful world on the edge of Xanthari space. Their work had attracted volunteers from a dozen species, all eager to explore the connection between emotion and enhanced performance. The living armor technology, once exclusive to Xanthari warriors, was evolving into something that could benefit anyone willing to embrace the full spectrum of their feelings. But the real revolution was quieter, more personal. It was found in the way Velara smiled when she woke up next to Kai each morning, in the way the armor no longer saw emotion as a malfunction to be corrected, but as a gift to be celebrated. It was in the growing number of couples who came to them, seeking to understand how love could make them stronger together than they ever were apart. The armor pulsed gently around them as they stood on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel by. 2 hearts beating in perfect synchronization, 2 minds united in purpose, 2 souls who had discovered that the greatest armor of all was the one they built together, piece by piece, out of trust and love and the courage to be vulnerable. The end, they had done more than save their relationship. They had proven that love was not the weakness their societies had taught them to fear, but the strength they had always been meant to find.